On this Thursday night, Ontario's Premier pulls the emergency brake. The impending province-wide shutdown.
We're now fighting a new enemy.
What difference will it make, and why some doctors say it's not enough to stop the spread of dangerous variants? Vaccines are hot commodities, so why are some doses being dumped?
Any waste is a problem, and it's a challenge.
The mistakes that cause waste and the patchwork of plans to prevent it. An incredible story of survival.
He's a tough little guy.
How did this 3-year-old survive lost in the woods for more than 3 days? Plus, happy April Fool's Day, a parental prank, and a mystery solved on Mars.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. It is April 1st, but the third wave of this pandemic is no joke. After weeks of warnings, the more transmissible variants are spreading fast. And with a record number of Ontarians now in intensive care, Ontario's Premier finally pulled what he calls an emergency brake.
This is a new pandemic. We're now fighting a new enemy. The new variants are far more dangerous than before.
Starting Saturday at midnight and for 4 weeks, all of Ontario will be under tighter public health restrictions. But it is not the stricter stay-at-home order ICU doctors and the province's own science advisors say is essential to save lives.
Whole families are now showing up in intensive care. With the new variants that are both more contagious and more dangerous, we're seeing situations where whole families end up in intensive care, all at the same time.
New modeling released today shows where this is headed. Variants now account for 67% of all new cases, and younger people are now ending up in the hospital. The risk of ICU admission has doubled, and the risk of death is 1.5 times higher for the B.1.1.7 variant, now the dominant strain in Ontario. Vaccines are not reaching the highest risk communities and are rolling out far too slowly to have any impact on the spread of the variants. Toronto and Peel, where case counts are rising fast, have already been under tight public health restrictions for weeks, and it's not working. So is the so-called emergency brake too little, too late? Travis Dhanraj has our top story tonight.
Ontario will pull the emergency brake for the entire province.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford says this was his only option, a 28-day province-wide shutdown, an attempt to deal with rapid spread of variants of concern and record-high ICU admissions.
We need to do this. I know there's a lot of people that just want to go out there and open up and no, they don't believe this variant can be passed. I'm sorry.
The decision comes after medical experts have warned for weeks stronger measures were needed. In just 2 days between March 26th and 28th, case rates increased by 7.7% to 101 cases per 100,000 people.
I've signed 27 death certificates for patients who died of COVID-19.
Critical care physician Dr. Michael Warner, along with 152 other ICU physicians, sent this letter to the province warning, "We cannot rely on the public health measures framework. It did not contain the less infectious, less deadly original variant in Wave 2, and it will not be enough to protect us from VOCs in Wave 3.
There needs to be an acknowledgement that the plans that were laid for Wave 2 was dealing with a different pandemic. Wave 3 is a new disease.
As part of the new restrictions, indoor and outdoor dining are prohibited. Gyms, nail salons, barbershops, and bars will be shut down. Non-essential retail is limited to 25% capacity. Most sports are prohibited, and outdoor gatherings are now capped at 5 people.
The government has provided money to restaurants, but personal services have been thrown aside completely. We've just been left hanging with nothing, and here we go again with nothing.
For business owners right across the province, this feels like Groundhog Day. Schools in Ontario will remain open.
Part of learning is actually being socializing and being with their friends.
When pushed for why more wasn't done sooner, Ontario's chief medical officer was defensive.
So I'd have to first say I don't agree it's a failure.
In gray zones where it's already a lockdown type situation like here in Toronto, there won't be much in terms of substantial changes other than patios shutting down. Experts agree the focus needs to shift now to speeding up vaccinations and also curbing spread in racialized communities and essential workplaces, something the province has struggled to do so far. Donna?
Travis Dhanraj in Toronto, thank you. Vaccines are not rolling out fast enough to stop this third wave. Here's where we stand with vaccinations in Canada now. Over 5.8 million vaccine doses have been administered. By the end of this week, Canada will have distributed 9.5 million doses. More than 1 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine are expected to arrive each week through April and May. 590,000 Moderna doses that were delayed last week are now expected to arrive tomorrow morning. And the federal government says the 1.5 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine coming from the U.S. will be distributed to the provinces and territories by Saturday. A further 300,000 AstraZeneca doses from the COVAX program are expected in the coming days. Those are the big picture numbers. As many Canadians know, trying to get a shot can be a frustrating, sometimes haphazard process. And as Heather Yourex-West discovered, some precious doses are going to waste.
I'm scared but excited.
Natalie Norman didn't expect to get the COVID-19 vaccine so soon. It's not yet her turn. But the Toronto woman was able to get immunized last weekend after signing up on a standby list for shots left over at the end of the day.
I had 30 minutes. They were like, can you be here in 30 minutes? I got there in about 37.
With limited supply, each vial of COVID-19 vaccine is precious. A dose squandered is a dose kept out of someone's arm. We reached out to Canada's 7 largest provinces to find out how much vaccine has been wasted so far. Only Alberta, Quebec, and Manitoba provided numbers. Quebec's loss rate is the lowest at 0.04%, or 552 doses lost. Alberta sits at 0.2%, losing about 1,269 doses, while Manitoba was a little higher at 0.9%, with a loss of 1,653 doses of vaccine.
In a global pandemic, any waste is, a problem, and it's a challenge.
There are 3 kinds of mistakes that lead to vaccine loss: human error, like a dropped vial, equipment failure, or mismanaged supply. Losses are minimal with the first 2, but if supply is mismanaged, then the losses can be great.
We have to have more flexibility and agility so that we don't have 500,000 doses sitting in a fridge expiring, over a date. That would just be heartbreaking.
Some people have said, it's not that big a deal as long as the vaccines end up in arms, and I would really counter that from an ethical point of view.
Ethicist Carrie Bowman says efforts to prevent vaccine waste need to continue to prioritize those most at risk. It's why some provinces have put strict standby policies in place. Alberta Health says pharmacies have been told waiting lists must prioritize those who are either now or will soon be eligible. But we called around and quickly found not all Alberta pharmacies are on the same page.
No, we're just kind of doing first come, first serve at the end of the day.
Do you have to be part of the eligibility pool then, or is it sort of open to anybody, first come, first serve?
At that point, it's sort of open.
A lucky break for those who can get it, but also undoubtedly a source of frustration for those left to wait. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Canadian health officials say a delay in the U.S. over a bad batch of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine shouldn't impact its distribution to Canada. An ingredient mix-up at a Baltimore production plant forced the company to throw away up to 15 million doses. Johnson & Johnson says they did not meet quality standards, but never got to the filling and finishing stages of the manufacturing process. The company which operates the facility, Emergent Biosolutions, has been flagged in the past for things like cracked vials and mold. Canada is expecting to receive the first of 10 million Johnson & Johnson doses by the end of this month. Pfizer-BioNTech now says its vaccine is 100% effective against the virus in South Africa, where a contagious variant was first discovered. The company issued a press release saying its data from phase 3 clinical trials also shows the vaccine is 91% effective at preventing COVID-19 up to 6 months after the second dose. That's slightly lower than the 95% efficacy first reported in November. Well, if you feel like the vaccine rollout is happening too slowly here in Canada, consider Europe. The World Health Organization said today Europe is being unacceptably slow and is prolonging the pandemic. The WHO says roughly 10% of people in Europe have received a single dose and just 4% are fully protected with 2 doses. It says cases are rising in all but one age group, people aged 80 and older. France has gone into another national lockdown, and other countries are nervously watching this third wave take hold. Crystal Goomansingh reports.
A trip to the market will again become a highlight. Schools are closing for a month, and a national curfew will keep people indoors from 7 p.m. till 6 a.m.
I wish they had just confined us in a more serious lockdown earlier.
French President Emmanuel Macron had been avoiding another round of national restrictions, but the pandemic forced his hand. This week, more than 5,000 COVID-19 patients were being treated in French ICUs. Pressures doctors haven't faced in nearly a year. Italy is also plagued with rising infections. A 3-day lockdown has been ordered for the Easter long weekend. Unless we fight against this virus, we're all dead, says this man. The number of lives lost has been climbing for 5 weeks. The 14-day average, according to the European Centre for Disease Control, is 489 deaths per 100,000 people. Since the beginning of the pandemic, public health measures have been weighed against politics.
And you see this internal argument in Germany, for example, changing direction, wanting to restrict and then rolling back because of political pressure.
Linda Bold is a professor of public health and says governments keep getting it wrong.
We've unfortunately had preventable deaths as a result.
She says the current wave is made worse because EU nations have only vaccinated about 11.6% of the population with a first dose.
I think they've been really hesitant to lay down the law.
No one likes a lockdown, but they do reduce the spread of the virus, taking pressure off health systems. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
2 little girls are in U.S. custody tonight after people smugglers dropped them over a 4-meter-high wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, and a warning: the video may be disturbing for some viewers. A U.S. Border Patrol camera captured it. A person believed to be a smuggler climbs the barrier and dangles one child, then drops her, and then does the same with a second child. The smuggler then climbs down the Mexican side and runs away. The girls aged 3 and 5 are sisters from Ecuador, and they were not injured. 2 months after the military coup in Myanmar, protesters are still being killed there. At least 521 people are now known to have died, including at least 43 children. The number of children killed has more than doubled in the past 12 days. That's according to the organization Save the Children. The human rights group also says 15 children under the age of 16 are among the dead. The youngest known victim, a 6-year-old girl, was reportedly shot during a raid on her home, and a 13-year-old boy was reportedly shot in the back of the head as he tried to run away from soldiers. 7 of Hong Kong's leading pro-democracy campaigners were found guilty today of unlawful assembly. They participated in a massive march in August of 2019, and it triggered a violent crackdown on demonstrators. Media tycoon Jimmy Lai, the founder of pro-democracy newspaper Apple Day, and Martin Lee, who founded the opposition Democratic Party and is often referred to as Hong Kong's father of democracy, were both found guilty of organizing the unauthorized event. More than 1 million people turned out. It is the latest blow to Hong Kong's democracy movement, and the maximum sentence is 5 years in jail. The fight for racial equality after George Floyd's death. Coming up, the reckoning and reform in the U.S. It was another emotional day at the murder trial of a former Minneapolis police officer accused of killing George Floyd. Courtney Ross, Floyd's girlfriend, testified through tears about the first time they met while Floyd was working as a security guard at a shelter.
Floyd came to me and Floyd has this great deep southern voice, raspy. He's like, "Sis, you okay, sis?" And I wasn't okay.
Ross is the first person who knew Floyd personally to testify at the trial. Part of her testimony included how she and Floyd struggled to overcome opioid addiction.
Both Floyd and I, our story, it's a classic story of how many people get addicted to opioids. We both suffered from chronic pain.
Derek Chauvin is facing a number of charges related to Floyd's death last year. He's pleaded not guilty to all those charges. This trial is being followed with intense interest across the U.S. and around the world. The video of Floyd's death while in police custody sparked an uprising and a reckoning over racial injustice. And in the U.S., it's brought about some of the most dramatic reforms since the civil rights era. Jackson Prosco reports, and a warning: some of the video in his story is disturbing.
It was the moment the world finally refused to look away, letting out a collective gasp as George Floyd took his final breaths under the knee of a police officer.
That video brought to life the truths that we've been telling for decades in this country. And it took a video of a black man being murdered on camera.
No justice! No peace!
Millions marched and demanded action.
Black Lives Matter!
Months after the protests faded, American life has been forever changed by those 9 agonizing minutes of video.
There are times at which the video is so clear and incontrovertible that people have to engage it in a different way.
30 years ago, another tape showed the beating of Rodney King at the hands of Los Angeles police. It seemed like it might be a transformational moment, but hope gave way to a long list of names, many now familiar, like Michael Brown, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd.
There was finally this large groundswell that coincided with the pandemic and the global economic downturn. And so you see disproportionate impact in multiple systems coinciding.
In the last 10 months, the Black Lives Matter movement went mainstream. Corporations made public commitments to diversity. Politicians everywhere discussed once taboo subjects like police reform and reparations.
You're hearing these things that are like, were super radical ideas in the past that are just like normalized.
The question is whether those impacts will fade over time. Immediately after Floyd's death, polls showed 60% of Americans believed it was murder. All these months later, that number sits at just 36%. Broken down by race, there's a sharp divide. 64% of black respondents believe it was murder, compared to just 28% of white respondents. The anguish on display at the trial of former officer Derek Chauvin may rip open wounds that have still not healed, reigniting the push for equality as Americans are reminded that for many it still hasn't been achieved. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Stakes on a plane still ahead. How can you tell if it's a prank or for real?
You're watching Global National.
April 1st is the day for pranks, but it's not always easy to tell what's a joke and what's not. Eating on a plane that doesn't actually take off, for example. Japan's All Nippon Airways cleared this flight for lunch, but not for takeoff. Yes, it is for real. For about $680, diners can enjoy a first-class seat on a plane parked on a Tokyo airport runway. The airline calls it a restaurant with wings. It was only going to last one day, but it's sold out, so they're expanding it. And some jokes today were real, like these boys who got a breakfast surprise. Look at their faces when they discovered their bowls of Cheerios were frozen. I'm pretty sure Sam and Leo Mullen, who are sons of our Ottawa bureau manager Brian Mullen, will find a way to get back at their parents for this. And this is a mystery solved. The Canadian Space Agency has discovered where all those single socks that go missing in the dryer end up. On Mars, it turns out. The space agency tweeted the news that the Perseverance rover found a pile on the red planet, but the hashtag April Fools does make it all a little suspicious. Search party success next. How did a 3-year-old survive outside for more than 3 days? It's impossible to imagine what the parents of a missing 3-year-old must have gone through. Their son, Jude, disappeared on Sunday in the woods north of Kingston, Ontario. The weather was cold and blustery. Police and volunteers looked everywhere for him, and as they were beginning to wind down that search yesterday, an officer spotted him. Abigail Beeman has the remarkable story of survival.
This is Jude's favorite place.
Chris Fisher has lived on this 200-acre wooded rural property for nearly 40 years. He thinks his grandson's survival is unbelievable.
It's just amazing he survived. I don't even know if I would have lived for that long.
On Sunday, 3-year-old Jude Layton went missing here. Police and volunteer crews combed woods and water day and night. At times, temperatures were below freezing.
It's a very treacherous area. If you wander off, it's quite easy to get lost. Even I have been turned around on the property myself.
From Sunday all the way to Wednesday, this clearing that's empty now was full with people, with vehicles. Fisher says 2 helicopters landed here until the best moment on Wednesday, when through that clearing, officers brought Jude home on an ATV.
Woo! That's the best day I've had in the OPP in 25 years.
It was Constable Scott McName's birthday when he got the call to help. He searched for 3 days.
It was rocky, it was steep. I'll be honest, I did not think that a 3-year-old, almost 4-year-old would be able to get that far back there.
Then, less than a kilometer from the family compound, McName spotted something blue. Another officer ran up ahead.
He said, "He's here." He was lying down on his stomach, and then Jude, the little boy, raised his head and opened his eyes, and he said, "And he's alive."
McName says Jude was wet but warm. He thinks his wool sweater may have saved him. He asked for some water.
He's a tough little guy, for sure.
The last year has been just horrendous for everybody, and this is something that should be uplifting to everybody across the country.
Jude is in hospital with his parents, still being checked out. The family is so grateful for everyone's support and for an unbelievably happy outcome at a time when everyone can use an extra smile. Abigail Beeman, Global News, South Frontenac, Ontario.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is this great grey owl in Foothills, Alberta. There are beautiful spots all over this country. Please email us yours to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.